Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. Today we're checking out this white, blue and green or band-colored clone deck, as we're going to try to make a clone army of Aangs at the Crossroads to take over the game. Our commander, a 5-mana 3/3 flyer, says when it enters we get to look at the top 5 cards of our library and put a creature card with mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. So that's the important part here. Aang can also potentially transform into the Destined Savior, which lets us Earthbend 2 each turn, but we're mostly interested in the front side. And this card is very much reminiscent of Giruda, which also lets you potentially string together a whole bunch of clone effects to keep re-enabling its ability. Of course, there is still a thing called the Legendary rule, so we cannot have more than one Aang in play at the same time, but we can potentially break that Legendary rule with a few different cards, and then once we have a non-legendary Aang in play, we can keep copying that Aang over and over, so we actually start progressing our board and making more and more 3/3 flyers. So then if we take a look at our deck breakdown, I've split it up into a few different categories, and the big one is going to be mana acceleration. Since we do want to get up to 5 mana as quickly as possible, I'm only using creatures to ramp, so all these cards we can also hit with Aang's ability to make sure the hit rate is as high as possible. And if we're up against a deck with a lot of creature removal that can maybe remove Aang before we get to clone it, it's also nice to have a bunch of mana acceleration so we can replay Aang paying the commander tax. And then our next biggest category is the clone effects, and there's a ton of these on Arena nowadays, but the most important ones by far are Spark Double, which lets us make a non-legendary copy of Aang, which we can now keep cloning from there on to make more and more Aangs. And there's also Ju-Di, aka Sakashima, which removes the legendary rule going forward, so then we can also just keep cloning Aangs without having to worry about the legendary rule. So those two are by far the most important, but we've got a bunch more with all sorts of fancy abilities. And then we also have a lot of flicker or blink effects. Most of these are also creatures that can exile Aang and return it to the battlefield, often at the beginning of the next end step, so we can re-enable Aang's ability while putting an additional creature onto the battlefield. Then we've got some interaction, creatures that have an effect when they enter the battlefield, so maybe if we don't immediately play Aang, we can also clone these creatures to further interact with the opponent's game plan, maybe exiling some of their permanents or destroying some artifacts or enchantments. And then last but not least, we also have a few ways to double up on Aang's trigger when it enters the battlefield. So now with every Aang triggering twice, if we start cloning it, we actually start netting additional cards that we can find. So before you know it, we'll find one of those non-legendary Aangs to completely take over. So that's our deck in a nutshell. Now for the deep dive, not going to spend too much time on the mana acceleration since we've seen these cards before. Noble Hierarch, a card we don't always get to include, so that's a nice addition. Badger Mole, very synergistic with all these creatures that tap for mana. Great Divide Guide also on theme. And then we also have some 3-drops that can put additional lands into play when they enter the battlefield, so these can also be nice to copy with our clone effects, and we don't mind if these get removed. Then we get to the clone effects, and for the most part they just copy a creature when they enter. Image is a bit cheaper, so it does have the drawback of getting removed if it becomes a target. Glasspool Mimic can also be a land. Mirror Image can only copy your own creatures, and we now also have the original clone, although I wouldn't recommend crafting it since it takes a mythic wildcard. And then some fancy abilities here with Disturb, can maybe renew the Fleshcrafter. Metamorph can copy both opposing creatures as well as artifacts. And then, as we mentioned, there's Sakashima removing the legendary rule, and Spark Double making a non-legendary copy with an extra +1 counter, so these are both very important. Then there's the Two-Faced Trickster, which enters with a different name at least, so we can now have it alongside Aang, but it is still legendary, so we can't keep copying this one over and over like we can with Spark Double or Sakashima. The Bandit we can maybe plot to play it for free on a future turn. Shape Thief has Flash. Impersonator can copy any non-land permanent on the battlefield, including the opponent's. Copy Crook will let our creature connive when it attacks. Operative will give it a shield counter. Vizier of Many Faces can be embalmed out of the graveyard, and Altered Ego can maybe pick up additional +1 counters if we cast it. Then we get to our flicker effects, with some of the cheapest ones here being Cloud Shift. Ephemerid's strictly better since we get to rebound it as well. There's Essence Flux. And then some creatures that we can also maybe hit with Aang to exile it. In the case of Charming Prince, get it back at the beginning of the next end step. Same with the Guardian of Girapur and Flicker Wisp. Soul Herder will trigger once each turn at the beginning of our end step, and then Restoration Angel's often the best one here, since it immediately exiles and returns our creature, so we can also maybe clone the Restoration Angel going forward if we don't have Sakashima or Spark Double. And then Thassa also triggers at the beginning of each end step, similar to Soul Herder, and then the Twins can use its Adventure to flicker, otherwise a decent hit still off Aang as a 4/4 flyer with Vigilance. Then we've got some interaction as well, Pact of Negation, a free counter spell to maybe help protect Aang from opposing counters, and then we don't mind paying for it on the following turn. Swords to Plowshares as the most efficient removal spell. The Airbender Ascension, still very synergistic, as we'll easily be able to get enough quest counters so it starts flickering creatures turn after turn as well. Then the Spellbinder can give us some hand disruption. Loran and Night of Autumn can be answers to artifacts and enchantments. Skyclave can exile any non-land permanent with mana value 4 or less. The Channeler can bounce stuff or draw cards. Jill can also bounce things. And Aang, Swift Savior, also very versatile with the airbending mechanic. Can also maybe set up the water bend if we go wide enough. And then our doubling effects include Katara, doubling triggers of allies we control. There's the Vocalist, which we can also warp for 2 mana to set it up on the cheap. And Panharmonicon, one of the few non-creature spells in this deck, so we wouldn't be able to hit it with Aang, but still a great card to get in play before we go off. As is a Roaming Throne, which is a creature, so we can find this with Aang, often naming human. And then a Mirror Box, similar to Sakashima, can also remove the legendary rule, so we can start going wide with additional Aangs, and also pumps up our creatures. The more of the same creature we have in play, the better. And then our mana base, a mix of basics, fetch lands, Cavern of Souls can also be important against blue decks to make Aang uncounterable, and then some good mana fixing, channel lands for additional interaction. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play, facing Hei Bai, so 5-color shrines. My hand is a little light on the ramp. Although Skyclave does offer meaningful interaction, can exile the shrines, at least most of them. But the problem is, if I don't get to 5 mana, I don't get to do much else. So maybe this is still a mulligan. This one seems a little bit better. Can start by getting a Surveil lands. Blue-white is fine. Turn to Divide Guide, and look for another ramp card, perhaps. Farmland I'll keep. So we're looking at a turn 4 Aang, perhaps. Next turn I could clone the Divide Guide, or we can keep up Swords. Yeah, I guess cloning the guide is fine. Do we have a preference? Can also do it at instant speed, I suppose. Yeah, I'll keep up Shape Thief. Opponent wants to Void Rends, but we can make a copy before it goes away. So I can still play Aang. Could also play the Ascension first, but let's go for it. Got another clone in hand. Vizier, copy Aang. Keep the original in case we end up flickering it. And Sakashima's excellent, since that overrides the legend rule. So we can potentially keep stacking Aangs. And now Vocalist would double the triggers going forward. Or I can go for Flicker Wisp, which maybe still has more upside. If our opponents go to Sweeper, it doesn't matter either way. So let's go Flicker Wisp, exile Aang. And get it back. And we can keep on cloning. Now also with a shield counter. So Spark Double, excellent, so more redundant Aangs that aren't legendary. Alright, so we're kind of going off here. Could go for a Mimic. And now Roaming Throne. And naming... what do we like? Ally, maybe? Okay, let's hope they don't have a sweeper. Our opponent's seeing double. And that's a tap land. So worst case, Toxic Deluge. Awaken the Honored Dead is fine. So goes for the Spark doubled Aang. And yeah, our opponent still scoops it up. I'll take it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Rofellos. Always a scary commander, but this hand's exciting. Have very few removal spells that would be able to take care of it, so not gonna bother trying to mulligan into them. But yeah, we've got some early acceleration. Maybe can warp a Vocalist before playing Aang, or we can try and cast it. Could also bounce Rofellos with a Channeler, so we've got a few options available here. Start by getting a Hedge Maze. And a Mimic is a tap land. I can probably do better. Shepherd hits for 1. Now maybe Fnatic over Bloom Tender. Although no, I should still go for Bloom Tender, because next turn if I do plan to channel or bounce Rofellos, this can make 2 mana and still play a Fnatic. Even if it doesn't block as well. Oh, that's turn 3 Serac and Goreclaw. Yeah, that's pretty scary. But I think I still bounce Rofellos instead of Serac. Because I can take a hit for 6, but opponent having access to 8 mana next turn is a lot scarier. Now Skyclave also an option, but then I would have to... Well, it's not even an option since this doesn't make white mana. So yeah, Channeler and bounce Rofellos. Play Fnatic. And then next turn I could technically already go off with Aang. Could also be nice to get the Vocalist in play first. Now, I guess with Serac, Rofellos does of course have haste. So that does make bouncing Rofellos a little bit less appealing. But it's still wasted 2 mana, I guess. Okay, so taking 13, opponent gets to trigger Gargaroth. Yeah, Rofellos is a pretty messed up card. So we need a pretty good turn with Aang. Can I play Skyclave first? Would let Bloom Tender tap for 3, so I think I can. Can I warp Vocalist first? 5, 6, 7, I can. So that probably has the highest upside here, actually. Alright, found a clone, copy Aang. Keep the original, in case we need to flicker it later. And now Sakashima removes the legendary rule, so that's awesome. Alright, we're going off. Keep cloning. Can also trigger Bantermole twice. That's a miss. Katara has to be the pick. More clones. Aang's with Savior also would be pretty strong here. Yeah, Aang can airbend 3 things here. So I can just send everything packing. And then we can keep going. Alright, I think we might be doing it here. More clones. And Rofellos scoops it up. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Vv'viza, so banned kind of a ramp, Conjure Planet deck. Yeah, I mean, our hand's keepable. I've got 2 ramp cards. Mirror Box could be fun. And Cavern's actually a huge draw if our opponent is keeping up counter spells. Start by getting a blue-white survey land. Opponent mono blue so far. I'll keep another land on top. And then sometimes it's worth it to just postpone Cavern until we're about to cast our commander, but I can also make the guides uncounterable, so that's probably worth it. And naming human. And then next turn we could summon Fenrir, we could play Mirror Box. If there's no interaction, I can just curve Mirror Box into Aang. Although maybe we want to play Aang with Ephemerate backup in case they do have some instant speed removal. So 3 mana, no play. If they have a counter spell, I would rather them counter the summon Fenrir than countering my Mirror Box. That resolves. So maybe get a forest. And then if I play Windswept Heath, I can still potentially Ephemerate summon Fenrir if needed. And with a Divide Guide, I don't even have to sacrifice the land to tap it for mana. Opponent with a Brainstorm. Maybe looking for white mana to play their commander. It's gonna be Vannifar, Evolved Enigma. Okay. In that case, I'll Surveil end of turn. And Noble Hierarch could be okay. Start by playing Aang, and then I would still have Ephemerates available, or I can tap out for Noble. Probably want to keep up Ephemerates. Finding Spark Double, that's a great start. Although the Vocalist also would have been nice. And now I can keep copying the non-legendary Aang. And Flashcrafter to keep going. More clone effects. Get the original. And then Charming Prince can still flicker. Alright, I'm still gonna keep up Ephemerates. Not gonna attack. And we can keep going. Nothing worth destroying with Loran. Go for a Altered Ego. So now I have to be careful to target the Spark Double still. And Athasa's not bad. Well, that's potentially a lethal army of Aangs. We'll have to wait and see if our opponent maybe has a board wipe. Opponent's reading all my cards now. Trying to piece together what just happened. If they have their own flicker effect, it's possible this face down card is something enormous. So that could still be bad. Momentary blink the face down card. Yeah, we're about to find out what it is. Omniscience, wow. Well, it does not get much more powerful than Omniscience. So I could respond here with Ephemerates in the hopes of maybe hitting some sort of disenchant effect for Omniscience. Sure. And then flicker the Spark Double maybe. Copy one of the Aangs. And and I did not find a disenchant. So then probably go for Roaming Throne and naming human. Well, actually, I think I messed up. I did have Otawara in hand as well, with how many legendaries? Because yeah, of course, these Aangs aren't legendary. Thassa's legendary. This Aang is legendary, so I'm not sure if I would have been able to channel this to bounce Omniscience. Yeah, because of course the benefit of Spark Double is that we get to keep multiple Aangs in play. The one drawback is that we cannot get the discount on Otawara. So if I did have enough legendaries, then of course Otawara Bounce Omniscience probably would have been the safer play. But it turns out our opponent didn't have anything to follow up the Omniscience. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing the Temur-colored Omnath. Very powerful landfall deck. We're on the draw without a 1 or 2 mana accelerant. So that has me a bit worried. But Mirror Box could be fun. Yeah, this is tough, because turn 3 Druid, if I want a Mirror Box before playing Aang. That's turn 4, turn 5. This might be too slow. But on the other hand, at least the Druid doesn't mind getting removed, it still ramps me. But we'll see. Omnath can do some busted things. And they're off to a good start with a Halfling. Alright, now I could Ascension the Halfling to make them replay it, so that slows them down a bit. And then we can start picking up more counters, eventually use it as a flicker effect. Risen Reef, that's the best elemental to combo with Omnath. And Swift Savior. Think I still go for Druid here. Could keep up Savior, and then Airbend Omnath when it's on the stack. If they don't go for Omnath, my turn would not be particularly exciting. Sure. Opponent just replays the Halfling, maybe missing the mana to cast Omnath in the first place. So, could go for Aang. Opponent does have a blue mana up, so they could have a wash away. So I'll take it slow, play Mirror Box. And then next turn we can maybe go for it. Especially if they tap out for Omnath here. Which they do. They will get to trigger Risen Reef, take out Spring Bloom. And just gotta hope to hit some clone effects. Swords doesn't hurt either. And yeah, we did not hit a clone. So that's the setback. Can go for Spellbinder. And maybe interact with the opponent's hand a bit. So they did actually have the Wash Away in hand last turn, had I gone for it. Hour of Devastation as a board wipe. Chandra can deal 3 to each non-elemental. And then some mana recursion and ramp. So, yeah, a lot to think about. I don't think I care about Unable to Scream since we can just flicker my creature to get rid of it. So it's mostly Hour of Devastation that could be really bad. And opponent doesn't have double blue to hardcast Wash Away. So yeah, I think it's Hour of Devastation here. And then I should Swords Omnath. Although Risen Reef was also a reasonable target, to be fair. Because they can now replay Omnath. Opponent's gonna deal with Aang first. And Zone Guard can get back a fetch. Alright. So next turn I get to Flicker Wisp, still have Swiss Savior available. And I guess they could hard cast Wash Away now, which I can also airbend. Opponent got the wrong alliance, so they can't even cast Wash Away now. Although, I guess they didn't have a breeding pool left. So now they're forced to crop rotation to still get another untapped blue source. Steam Vents. And now we can Wash Away. And now we can airbend. Flicker Wisp resolves. Flicker Aang. And the Ascension's also online. And then I guess I want to flicker the Flicker Wisp. Could also flicker any one of my other creatures here, to be fair. Spellbinder to make Chandra more expensive. Might still be safer. Because we have a Ascension that will provide more ETB effects going forward. Alright, can we hit some clones? We still cannot. Hit a Roaming Throne. Jill could bounce stuff. Or Soul Herder for more flickers, but it's not really needed when we have Ascension. So, kind of liking the Roaming Throne here. Naming human, probably more prevalent than ally. Okay. So we'll see what our opponent wants to do here. They could just wipe the board with Hour of Devastation. Which is what they'll do. Alright, that's a setback. But not unrecoverable. So back to the command zone. Get a bunch of useless triggers. Alright, so it's 7 mana to redeploy. And we hit a Restoration Angel, better than Phantasmal Image. Well, it's not necessarily true because we have the Mirror Box, but there's a chance our opponent could remove the Mirror Box, so then I might prefer the Angel. And then now probably go for a Guide over Banjamol. Flicker Aang. And hit the Twins. Alright, so far we've not hit a lot of clone effects, but apparently it's still good enough. I'll take it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Gretchen, blue-green, kind of a rampy counterspell deck. So having Spellbinder to maybe bait out a first counter is useful. Impersonator can also copy it, so I'll give it a shot. But this could be one of the more annoying matchups. Start with Mystic, could have also played a tapped Headquarters first. There's a few ways you can build a Gretchen deck. But yeah, opponent starting with the Training Grounds is scary, since that can discount the ability down to just 2 mana. But yeah, I guess I'm already threatening a turn 3 Aang over here. Opponent taps out for Gretchen. So Coast seems clear. And we hit a clone effect that gives Aang a different name. And either a Roaming Throne or Katara. There's also a Loran to blow up Training Grounds or Flicker Wisp to flicker Aang and keep going. All pretty great options, to be fair. So for opponent, going to be keeping up counter spells going forward. Maybe I do just want to Flicker Wisp here and get the most out of Aang while we can. And keep cloning. No longer want to clone Flicker Wisp, I don't think, although it is an option. Then Aang will just come back at the beginning of the opponent's end step, which may not be a bad thing. Okay. So we've got some 3-powered flyers. Aang's going to be coming back. And we'll take it from there. And now they can't really afford to sit back on counter spells when we can just kill them in a few attacks. Alright, this one removes the legendary rule, so that one's perfect. And we can keep going. So we might be able to just win the game here. More clones. And this one is going to trigger at the beginning of the next end step, so might be better off with either Halfling or Soul Herder. Don't have any legendary creatures in hand. Soul Herder it is. Opponent activates Gretchen. Puts in a land. So yeah, this already looks like a lethal attack, but I can still check out their hand just to make sure there's nothing that can interfere. And our opponent's gonna scoop it up. They don't even want to show what they're working with. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Uharis, blue-red. Pretty strong when you get to play it out of the command zone to trigger its own ability. That being said, this hand's not bad either. Got turn 2 Caryatids, difficult for the opponent to remove, and then Essence Flux as maybe a cheap way to flicker Aang. So the main concern would be a counterspell. Although this deck is typically more interested in playing a bunch of pump spells. So we'll see. Turn 1 Channeler, so yeah, it's definitely a more aggressively slanted deck. I can get a blue-white Surveil. Channeler gives me a bit of interaction, so that could be alright. Also would have taken another ramp card. Opponent cycling Halorian Revealed. So 2 types for Delirium so far. And gets the Surveil land. And keeps on top. Presumably another land. And now Divide Guide is another possibility. Yeah, don't mind it. Not in a hurry to bounce the Channeler. Could also draw with Channeler, to be fair. But next turn I would be able to play Aang and keep up Essence Flux. So this they cannot cast during first, second or third turn of the game, so they still need to wait a turn. And no attack from the Channeler, and our opponent's gonna keep up 3 mana. So probably don't wanna just tap out for Aang here. And instead can try Channeler, draw card. Next turn I could also use Fleshcrafter to clone the Channeler. So we've got some plays we can make outside of just comboing with Aang. Do I attack? Sure. I'm fine with the trade. Opponent's gonna bounce with Cyclonic Rift. Can just recast it here. And they still seem to have some cheap interaction up. Spell Snare to counter. That makes more sense. But it's still fine. Does mean our opponent is pretty heavy on the counter spells. So we'll see if they have a cheap answer for Aang. This looks like a Delve spell. Opponent's bestowing Detective's Phoenix, so yeah, this is gonna hurt. Probably want to trade here. Although, flickering the channeler to bounce Uharis could also be decent, since it does attack for a lot of damage. Although now they could just snipe the channeler instead of going face. That's alright. Okay, I get to play Aang with Essence Flux backup. So gotta hope for some good copy effects. Start with Guardian to flicker maybe. Get an extra 3/3 flyer. And then Mimic. Could also copy the Guardian, but then I'm not gonna get a chance to maybe make more clones. Keep the original Aang. And our Restoration Angel, another good one. And Jill can now bounce Uharis. Alright, so that was a pretty good sequence. Still have Essence Flux up in case they try and remove it. So next turn I can maybe start by trying to clone Aang or a Restoration Angel, and then still have Essence Flux as backup. Stock up is fine. Stern Scolding goes to the graveyard. If they replay this from their hands, they do not get the additional damage end of turn at least. And no attacks from my opponents. Alright, Impersonator can also clone stuff. Probably want to still use the Flesh Crafter since Impersonator is a bit more flexible as it can copy any permanents. Start with Restoration Angel, Flicker Aang. Finding Summon Fenrir. Alright, I'm still gonna hang on to the Essence Flux. And then could maybe attack with Jill. If this dies, our opponent can still maybe get it back out of the graveyard. So I'm not in a hurry. Opponent is at 19. Yeah, I guess we can start getting aggressive. Especially when we still have an Essence Flux. Opponent does take the trade. Channeler now flies and is forced to attack. So can line up a good block with our 4 toughness flyers. Now what I cannot do is flicker Jill to maybe bounce something. So could have left myself with that option. Uharis is back. And they're gonna bestow the Phoenix. So I could try just chumping with Aang and flickering it. And I guess now with Bestow, they get to exile a bunch of cards to get rid of Delirium, so they're not forced to attack with Channeler. Okay. Suppose I can also Essence Flux the Restoration Angel. It's maybe weaker in the face of a bounce spell on Aang, as opposed to just flickering Aang itself. So let's see, this says, at the beginning of your end step, if you've played a land or cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand. Does this count as casting a spell? If you cast it for its bestow cost, so yeah, it is casting a spell. So they could still target Aang with Uharis trigger end of turn, but I can also just recast it pretty easily. Yeah, this is fine. Probably overthinking it. Find a clone. Can clone Restoration Angel. Flicker Aang. And that's a miss. Okay. End of turn. We're shooting Aang. It is now also a Vigilant Flyer, which can maybe hold off an attack. Alright, takes out a Restoration Angel. It's my turn. Aang transforms. So this says land creatures have vigilance. Beginning of combat, Earthbend 2. So if I were to do that, I'm close to attacking for lethal. Or I can just use the Impersonator to copy Resto Angel and keep going. And then we can still play Soul Herder as well. Yeah, those are all good options. So this says at the beginning of combat, so I may as well just do that first. Although I could have also seen if I wanted to just set up lethal. So I don't think I bother. We can probably just go all out. Opponent could maybe Reverse Rebuke me next turn. That would be bad. But yeah, no attacks. Now I can sack this and get an extra land out of it. Copy Resto Angel once again. Flicker Aang. Get the front side. And this one has a different name. So can copy Aang or once again Restoration Angel. Yeah, Restoration Angel is great since we get to immediately flicker as opposed to having to wait until end step. And now Spellbinder can maybe have a look, or I can Swift Savior, get rid of Uharis. Might be safer. And then I can still play Soul Herder. Alright, our opponent has seen enough. So had I gone through that whole thing in my first main phase, I probably could have set up a pretty good attack here. But we're just having fun flickering Aang. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Nethroi, so a graveyard to reanimator deck of sorts. Hand seems functional enough, with Fnatic as our only ramp at the moment, but we have some interaction too. And then Sakashima saying the legend rule doesn't apply is pretty important too. Keep a land. Now Lookout gives us more mana acceleration. So our opponent's going to be trying to fill the graveyard and then mutate to get a bunch of stuff back. So Jet Collector potentially able to make a Mox Jet. And now a Banisher. Exiling my Fnatic. Oh, that's too bad. Go for Lookout. And then next turn I could still go for Aang. Or we can take it slow. Maybe keep up Cloud Shift. Depends whether or not I draw land next turn. Although I could also technically copy the Lookout. Death Rites. And a Birthing Ritual. Take 4. Alright, so what are we thinking? Opponent is tapped out. So Coast could be clear for Aang. Although Aang's going to be much more effective without a legend rule applying. That being said, I could also just destroy the Birthing Ritual, which is pretty strong. So, yeah, couple options. I think I actually do copy the Lookout here. And then I can fetch probably another Forests. Well, that's not how I wanted to tap my mana necessarily. Yeah, I was hoping to still play the birds out. That's fine, I still have enough mana for Aang. Keep up Cloud Shift, and I could technically Cloud Shift the Lookout once again. So our opponent gets back Deathrite Shaman. Attacks for 2. Could also double block it. But nah, let's just take it. Let's see what Birthing Ritual finds. Well, our opponents put more alchemy cards in play than non-alchemy. Non-land permanents, now Town Greeter. Okay, finally fills the graveyard for Nethroi. Take my turn. And then human play Aang. With Cloud Shift backup in case they try and remove it right away. And now the legend rule does not apply. So we get to maybe string together a whole bunch of Aangs. Starting with Spark Double, that's another great one since that one's not legendary. And a Divine Guide. Play birds and pass. Could also just Cloud Shift now to keep going, but I'll keep this as insurance. Also don't love that I did not leave up my actual white source for Cloud Shift, so if the Divine Guide dies, I no longer have access to it. So yeah, the auto tapper should always be double checked. So our opponents could mutate Nethroi, get back Grist, and some other stuff. It's going to be a Titan of Industry instead. Nothing for it to blow up, but it does block my flyers pretty well. Birthing Ritual triggers once again. And a Chupacabra wants to take out my Spark Double. Copy Aang. And find Vizier, which can copy the non-legendary Aang as well. And we'll keep it going. Do I have a preference here? Can maybe disturb the Mimic at some point if it dies. Okay, Roaming Throne's tempting, but I should probably just keep cloning, since I don't actually have a clone in hand. And now Aang could also airbend the Titan if we have lethal. 7, 10, 16... 22. Yeah, this looks lethal to me. Alright, take my turn. I could even water bends, tapping some of my creatures. So this is 7 mana. Now the auto tapper cannot do the easy part. That's fine. And attack. Sweet. And that'll do it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Grist the Hunger Tide, so black-green insects maybe. Our hand is reasonable. Bloom Tender is probably going to get removed, but Can still run it out, and then we've got some other powerful cards for enabling Aang. So get a green-white survey land, and we just want more mana. Skyclave is decent, also good with Soul Herder, but I think I try and just enable my primary game plan. So if our opponent wants, they could play Grist, sack the birds to take out a Bloom Tender. Don't know if that's all that beneficial. Alright, opponent's still going for it. So then now, I guess I play Soul Herder. Nothing to flicker yet. And a Wayfinder. So next turn they can -2 Grist again. I think I'll be copying Soul Herder as opposed to playing the Vocalist. And find another clone. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Could also plot the Bandits and then keep up Ephemerate. Or I can just tap out for the Copy Crook, make another Soul Herder, and they can sort of flicker each other. This can also copy the opponent's creatures, by the way, so... What I could do is copy the Wayfinder first, just to hit my land for next turn, and then flicker, turn into another Soul Herder. So I'll have at least one Soul Herder in play to hopefully flicker Aang. Alright, opponent did not like that. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Effie, Fast Learner. My hand could use an extra land to set up turn 2 Lookout. But yeah, I'll keep. If I fetch Breeding Pool, at the very least I could Phantasmal Image copy the Elvish Mystic on turn 2, if I don't hit the untapped land. But then I will still need to find white mana to cast Aang. So it's not entirely clear what the correct play is here. Yeah, I think I'll go for Breeding Pool. I'm pretty likely to find another white source eventually. Alright, there we go. So that solves all my problems. And then Metamorph, I don't need to keep. Now I could actually play Panharmonicon first, before we play Aang. Just to make it all the more impactful. And then next turn we should see some fireworks. Could also consider trumping with a Lookout, but maybe I'll keep it around for a bit longer. Tumblewag, also a great way to double your +1 counters. Okay. Let's hope for some clone effects. Alright, start with a Vocalist, that's excellent. Another Panharmonicon effect, basically. And now Vizier, copy Aang. I'll keep the original in case we end up flickering it. And then this one gives it a different name. Oh yeah, we've got a million triggers on the stack already. It's hard to keep track of. A Lotus Cobra. Nothing to blow up with Loron, so yeah, I'll go for a clone since with Vocalist and Panharmonicon, that's a bunch more triggers. And Spark Double, that's the one we really wanted. So now we can just keep copying the Spark Doubled Aang, since that one is not legendary. So now I can probably put all my creatures in play. Find some interaction. Spellbinder is going to trigger 3 times. So we get to exile everything. Put all those alchemy cards in exile, please. So I don't need to read them. And keep on copying. So this is the Spark Double. At least it's easy to recognize with a +1 counter. And yeah, our opponent has seen enough. We can pretty much make an entire army of Aangs and next turn win the game. Alright, so we get to see Aang's clone army in action. And yeah, this deck is incredibly impressive once you start going off. The main threats to this strategy are counter spells just preventing you from resolving Aang in the first place, but hopefully with a cavern or just additional mana to recast it, you'll still be able to get it in play. But a dedicated mono-blue counterspell deck, if you don't draw your cavern, is going to be pretty difficult to beat. But yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.